Hello, everybody. Welcome to this first webinar. Apologies for a little bit late starting. We were in different locations, so we had to just figure that out. But welcome. And first of all, some protocols. You are all in mute mode, which we request you to stay in mute mode. If you would like to say something or you have a question, then raise your hand and we will see who is wanting to say something, and I will call upon you, and at that point you will be unmuted to ask your question or make a comment, and then we'll ask you to mute yourself again so that Moitri and I can then respond to your question. So I hope that is clear to everybody, and I hope you're all fine, and we just go straight into the webinar, and maybe we can spend some time at the end to catch up to see how you all are. So today's session is to really get a better understanding of gender analysis concepts in development. We realized that, okay, so just checking. So can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just seeing whether other people can. Can people let us know through the chat whether or not you cannot hear us? So there's a chat function, as you can see on your menu. So if anybody cannot hear, let me know. Okay, I'm going to assume that everybody can hear me because I have not heard anybody. One last time, if you cannot hear me, put up your hand. Right, I have not seen any hands up, so I will assume. Okay, so the objective of this session is to understand genderless concepts in development, and what we realized is that we needed to go more depth into what these concepts mean in development in particular, and we'll be looking at the structure of what is the end goal of development, what are some key gender analysis concepts in development, based on the reading that of the guide that was sent to you, and then we'll look at a feminist critique of the goal of development. Okay, so I'm just going to now, whoops, here, sorry about that.
You have to give me the microphone.
No, I'm not done yet there, Moitri. Basically, this is going to be in 3 sections. We're going to be, Moichi's going to present the concepts that were presented in the guide, and then we will have some questions and answers after each of those concepts, and then we will look at the case study that was provided for you as a second, and then third, look at overall questions that you may have. So I hope that's clear, and now I'm going to turn over to Moitri as a presenter. Okay. Okay, right.
Thank
okay,
you.
Moitri. Okay, Moitri, it's over to you, and I will run the slide, so you just have to let me know to click ahead. Are you okay with the start of the slide?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay.
This slide is correct. Okay. Hi, everybody. We are just going to go over the session that we did in gender analysis during the first module, but we'll do it in more depth. And we will add to it our understanding of development. So as I said, the objective of this session is to understand gender analysis concepts in development. And the structure will be I'll first talk about what the end goal of development is in policy terms and has been for 40 years. We'll look at the key gender analysis concepts in development, and we'll provide a feminist critique. I think Franz has already gone over this.
Yeah.
Okay, Franz, can you change the PowerPoint? Yes. So if you look at it, whatever way we see it, in policy, in theory, in everything, the end goal of development is actually managed by and talked about from the point of view of macroeconomists. And in a sense, it all boils down to the end goal being economic growth. Now, economic growth, people have argued that it's a means. If you don't have growth, you can't actually distribute the growth and remove poverty. But between the means and ends, the problem has become that it's become an end in itself. And that is because the way in which development is measured, that is, whether a country is underdeveloped or developing or developed, is by looking at the gross national product, GNP, which measures basically the production of goods and services that are bought and sold in the marketplace, not personally exchanged, not done for one relative to another, but actually there has to be a market transaction of that particular good or service. So it's so there is a huge gender subtext to this paradigm, and so we're going to go into the analytical tools first, and then we'll come back to what is this gender subtext. Okay. France?
Next.
Yeah. The gender analysis conceptual tools, generally we think of it in terms of A, the gender division of labor, B, the access and control over resources and benefits, C, the production and social reproduction, and D, social institutions which make the rules. In this presentation, I'm only going to deal with the first three, and that too in the following order. The gender division of labor, and I'll do production. So I'll do it in that particular order. I will leave out social institutions for now, just end with the tools and then go on to development. Yes. Franz, next.
Coming.
Okay. The gender division of labor, it's actually it's become a very kind of simplistically thought about. It's thought about in terms of the allocation of particular tasks to a particular gender, and it becomes part of that gender. It's often referred to as roles, the roles that women and men play, but it's not actually roles because it's far more complicated than that. The gender division of labor, or what men and women do to be men and women, is in a particular context, in a particular society, is informed by social rules. That is, you're expected to do these things because your gender is expected to do this. It refers both to your role, but also your responsibility for doing it. And because of the doing of particular types of work or labor, performance of labor by particular genders, what happens is you get a division of skills. So for example, it's kind of well-known fact that there are fewer women in the public sphere than there are men. I don't really mean in jobs, but I mean that I actually mean think about anything. So say even community meetings, there'll be fewer women than men. And that is often, you can look back on it and try to extrapolate that it might be because of this division of skills. Whereas women are supposed to excel at most things pertaining to the family household, men are encouraged from a very young age to be in the public sphere. And that is why they acquire those skills. Not necessarily that everybody is a super smart public speaker, but at least that is the sphere that they are acquainted with and better at. It leads also to gender hierarchies because it, like public work or going out to earn a living, etc., gets attached to the particular gender, the definition of the particular gender. So men go out to work, etc., means that that particular kind of work becomes much more valuable. And as a result, you create hierarchies, gender hierarchies, because of the division of labor. But most importantly, the gender division of labor becomes part of gender identity. And I think we all know this, especially those of us women who are both working as well as have children or families, etc. It is far more difficult for us to overstep the kind of thing, boundary between the home and the public world, because you have children, you have housework, and that it's part of your identity to fulfill those as well as you fulfill your public tasks. It's often said that women have to excel in all the spheres that they participate, and modern women have it very hard. That's because it's part of gender identity. You yourself, or we, all of us, imagine ourselves to be this particular gender because we do this particular activity. The thing about the roles and the responsibility is that because gender division of labor is about social rules, there are punishments for not actually doing what is expected of your gender. And we know that from many instances. Okay, Franz, next slide.
Should we allow for some questions before we go to the next one?
Yeah, okay, yes.
Okay. So if there are any questions from people, please raise your hand, and Roberta will unmute you to ask your question. So just use the raise your hand icon. And I assume everybody knows where the raise your hand icon is. Okay, so I will assume for now that people do not have any questions. We will move on to the next slide. I am not getting any feedback from anybody, so it would be good if you could, while you're listening, just type up a text message so that we can actually see within the program that in fact you are able to hear us, because we just want to make sure. Okay, thank you very much. Next slide, Moitri.
Yeah. So I'm going to go straight on to production and reproduction, or the social. It's actually, we give our labor, this is a further continuation of what the gender division of labor means. That's both men and women, give our labor to, there's something wrong here, or to care for others. And we also, if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, that's about we care for others, plus we produce goods and services that help to feed our families. So what the caring for others is called social reproduction, because it's involved, it's all that labor going into reproducing our life and that of others. If you don't feed a baby, it will die, etc., etc. So from day zero, basically, as soon as you're born, there are others looking after you. Care labor is responsible for actually allowing you to grow and becoming an adult, contributing human being. Now, it's only if you're a healthy, contributing human being can you produce also, and that's called production. That is, the production is always those things, that goods and services that you produce when you are healthy living being and have a job or whatever you do. And that is bought and sold in the marketplace. Okay, Franz,
All
next.
right. So I'm just going to give people an opportunity now to ask any questions. So you can either raise your hand or in the questions menu, you can also type in your questions. And we've also seen that, thank you, that Enoch, Julie, and others have acknowledged, and Kieran, and sorry, Kieran, that the voice is breaking up. It must be a connection. So at least you know people are listening. So just if you want to give you a few seconds to raise your hand or answer or ask a question within the questions option of the box. Okay, Agnes. So Agnes, we're now going to unmute you. Or you can unmute yourself. Okay, here we go. Agnes. Yeah, we can't hear you, Agnes. We have you unmuted. Maybe you can type your question, please, under questions. We just have to wait more because Agnes has a question.
Okay.
Okay, we're just still checking. Agnes, do you know how to use the questions function? Okay, all right. Until we figure that out, maybe we can then move on. And so maybe you can send Agnes your question either via email or Skype, and then we can take it from there. Sorry about that. Okay, Moitri, I'm going to the next slide.
Okay. Right.
Okay. Okay.
There's something wrong with this. So I'm going to look at my own screen. Sorry. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think we can. I can hear you. Okay.
Okay. So we were at production and social reproduction, and we're on the second slide of that. So the thing is to remember is that production and reproduction activities, are they valued equally by society? Of course not. Production activities are always more valued, because they're more visible. You can see them. There's in a commoditized economy as now that we have, you get paid, etc., for having done something, some work or job. And if you're not paid, then if you're not employed, for example, you're looked down on. So actually production activities compared to social reproduction activities, which are the care activities, it is more valued because they're more visible. So what's the result of that? Well, it's true that men and women both do social reproduction tasks, but the world over, there's a stickiness to this kind of labor. And that is, it seems to stick to one gender primarily, and that is women. Okay, so women often do much of the reproduction tasks. Since it has less value than production tasks, what they do gets undervalued. Women get fewer resources to perform these tasks, women get fewer benefits, and as a result, gender hierarchies are created. Yes? Hello? Hello?
Yeah,
Franz?
we're here, Moitri. I'm here, Moitri. Yeah. Don't panic.
Okay.
Okay, have you finished?
Yes, please
Okay.
go on to the next one.
Okay. We're going next to access control. I wonder if we could just
I just want to
again.
mention, yes, I just want to mention one thing. Yeah, I just want to mention one thing, which is that women's unpaid labor is often regarded as elastic, able to stretch as to make any shortfall in other kinds of resources available for reproduction and maintenance of human resources.
Enoch first.
Yeah. So now it's
Okay. So we have a question, two questions, Moitri. One from
yes.
Enoch, and he writes, in a subsistence economy where there is no money used, but the intention is for exchange, how would you regard that as production? In a subsistence economy where there is no money used, but the intention is for exchange, would you regard that as production?
Yeah, it doesn't matter what I regard. I would say, of course, people are kind of doing their thing, and it's very important, etc. That's not, that's what I think or you think is not important. How is it being measured? That's what you have to think about. And the way it's being measured is via the GNP. And the GNP only measures things that are bought and sold, goods and services bought and sold. So exchange, it doesn't measure, it doesn't know how to. It is so, I'll come to that. There is more to this story that becomes really problematic. Okay.
And can I just add to that? So Enoch, I think that's a good point in a sense that if production is about the good, as Moitri says, it's about goods and services produced, and it's not measured, such as a barter or something like that, then how does it count? How does it inform policy? And then if you could sort of, for example, gender issues, and the typical example is that for health services, sometimes you have to pay for those health services. But if you don't have cash, if you can't do a formal exchange, pay a doctor, then who do you go to? You go to your local health practitioner or the traditional healer, and you give him a chicken. So that is a class issue, but then you can look at that from a gender issue. So if people are getting their health services through because they're poor or because they're female-headed households or whoever they are, and they're doing that through barter, then it doesn't register in the economy, and therefore you're left out. And that would be the point of that. Okay, we also have Kieran, who has a question, and we're going to unmute you, Kieran. Oh yeah. Okay, Kieran, please ask your question.
Hello, France, Martri, everyone. Good to hear you after quite some time. I'm just while going through the slides, I'm just wondering, during our module 1, we did talk about social labor divisions, and we did talk about production and reproduction. I could see a few of the slides that we have already studied during the module 1. So I'm just wondering how different is this going to be from the one that we have already studied during the module 1? Are we going into more details? Sorry for joining late, so I'm just wondering how different this is going to be from the module 1 that we have already covered this part of labor divisions during that module.
Okay. Do you want me to answer, Franz?
Why don't you start, and I can follow up with a more formal answer about the structure of the session.
Okay. Sorry, Kira, that you joined late, and thanks very much for actually being able to unmute and speak to us. Welcome. I said right at the beginning that we are going to go over what we did in gender analysis, because that was what we felt was that there was a missing point. And the point was to link it to development in the way in which we are now doing. So there are some extra slides, but at least in defining the concepts, conceptual tools, it is very similar. We'll make it all we bring it all together in questioning how these forms of labor enter policy or don't enter policy. That will be the additional part of this particular session. Okay.
And just to mention also, Kieran, is that there was a reading that you were asked to do, which shows how the concepts are being used in a case study, and then so we'll be going into more detail of that after this initial part of the webinar. Is that okay, Kieran?
Yep. Okay.
Great.
Got
Okay,
it. Thank
we're
you.
going to now unmute you, and Moichi, I'm going to proceed on the slides because I don't think there are any more questions.
Sure. Thank
Oh,
you.
I'm sorry. No, Agnes has a question.
Yeah.
Right. Um, okay, so Agnes says, um, just wanted to comment, punishments for not complying. These manifest in all sorts of human rights abuse from physical, emotional, and otherwise, especially at household level and other informal settings. So it's really
Yeah.
about the punishments for not complying, that issue.
Yeah. 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 That's right. Because it's social rules. And so any not behaving properly according to the social rules elicits punishments, and these are in the form of mainly informal at the household, community, your immediate neighborhood level. People, you will be emotionally or not always physically, certainly punished for not fulfilling. Yeah.
An example, I suppose, of that, Moitri, is if we go to sort of the gender division of labor and hierarchies. So we said that through this division of labor, hierarchies are created, and also that really enforces the idea of who does what. So and perhaps in a more in a broad sense of when you look at what happens to women, for example, when they are community leaders. Well, we can also look at the recent killings of environmental human rights defenders in Latin America who were killed in part because they were also opposing major corporations, but also because they were women taking on what is not understood as what should be part of their role. So that is an example of when women do take on role, and men as well. So men do get when there's a particular when they don't fulfill that hierarchy or that role, or that idea, then men will also be faced that stigma. Though of course we know it's not as extreme as women do when they transgress those rules.
Well, I don't think it's let's not make it a qualitative degree thing.
No, no.
Because in a sense, young men who are unemployed uh, have a very, very bad time. And that's as a gender, because it's a gendered identity, is as a gender, they have a very, very bad time because they suffer psychologically, emotionally, in all kinds of ways. Okay.
Absolutely. Okay. Okay. Do you want to proceed, Moitri?
Yes.
Okay.
I think
Access
we've done
control.
this slide. The next one.
You haven't done access control yet.
Okay. Sorry, I was somewhere else. Okay. So access and control. Now, the thing about benefits, for doing all our work, I mean, all this labor, of course, we are given access to and we can control resources. Without resources, you can't act, basically. And so to act, you are able to access certain resources and some are able to control. The access and control over resources often defines the character of a gender. Who has more control, who has greater access to resources. It defines a gender. It also defines the gender hierarchy. So access is often referred to as the opportunity to use something, and of course, control is you can decide. If you control something, you can decide and define how it's going to be used. So I think in the classroom, I gave a very silly but everyday image of if I don't have a mobile and I borrow yours, you can give me access. Of course, I can have access. But say, for example, in Amsterdam, and I want to call India or, Kenya, I would still have to ask you, can I do that? Because it's an expensive call. You can define the usage because you own it. Yeah, you can say no, sorry, you can make a local call, but you can't make an international call. So this is what access and control actually means. If you think about it in terms of land, yeah, the usage of land. Um, Women work on the land, yeah, in most parts of the world, more intensely in others than in some than in others. For example, in Africa, uh, they have access to the land for the work and for growing the crops, but they cannot decide, well, shall we switch to the next crop next year rather than this one? They often, in some circumstances, they will not be able to define the use. That I think probably that actually then characterizes the ownership. Um, we Resources are what we use to produce things. That is, and we need different kinds of resources. Human resources, that is labor power, your healthy labor, you need skills, you need tangible resources, money, assets, etc. But you also need intangible resources like solidarity, contacts, information, political clout. And the less advantaged, the more disadvantaged you are in a society, class-wise, yeah, you will find, and otherwise, you will find that you are relying more and more on having to rely on trading your intangible resources in order to get tangible ones. And benefits, resources are what you use to produce things, but benefits are the results of what you produce. So farmers produce a crop, they sell it in the market or they consume it at home. So that's the benefit. You go out to work, you earn a living, at the end of the month you bring a salary home, and that's the benefit. Now, benefits are the result of the use of resources, where they can be to meet basic needs, money, assets, education, or status. Next one, please.
All right, we have a question or comment from Enoch, who writes,
yeah,
many male and female in Uganda under a land tenure system called Milo, sorry if I'm mispronouncing, do not own land because it is the preserve of a few men and women who can buy it or inherit it. But the stereotype is that all men own land, and this could have negative policy implications where emphasis is placed on land ownership of women and girls, and they forget men and boys. So this should be context specific.
Yes, Enoch, absolutely. But landlessness is, of course, there are landless men also. There's no doubt about it. There are landless families. But overall, I think it's not a matter of degree again. Depending on the context, it's not whether men or women own land only. Think about in terms of intersecting inequalities. If you're low class, if you're poor, you're less likely to own land or less land. If you are a sharecropper who's a man, you're more likely to get sharecropping than if you would in certain contexts than if you were a woman. So these are all kind of hierarchies that play into this. It's not men, women, and it's not about getting the policy wrong. Of course, they do mention who hasn't got land. That is what the problem is. They generalize. They generalize to a lot that who hasn't got the land. That they say it's women. If men also, but there are, as you say, of course, depending on class, men also don't have access to or control over productive assets, and that can be land. Okay.
Just maybe one comment to that, Moitri, is absolutely so. So I think we do need to get out of these binaries of whether people have control over not, um, and who has that, and just its exclusion to the other. As Moitri said, landlessness is experienced by men and women, but what we can do with that is to understand how is that gendered. So if you're landless of a particular class and a man and woman, the implications are similar, but they're also different. So I think we need to get out of, like you said, Neok, that it is a question of being context specific, and certainly not just assuming that all women are landless and men have land. Absolutely. Okay. Next, Moitri. Next slide.
Yeah, and I really would ask you to also think about access and control in another way. That is, yes, let's go on to the next one. I don't know whether I mentioned it. No, wait, hold on. I want to mention it here. Access and control, like Enoch, you said, is often, kind of used as a binary too. Either you have access or you have control. But it can't be that way. Because as you can see, society is much more complicated than that. So I wanted to give actually an example from Uganda, from a study we did on land and women and gender relations in land structures. When it was about a woman who actually inherited, but her stepson, oh no, step cousin, that is a husband's brother's son, objected and created a lot of problems, even though the court granted her the land, her title up to the land. And she was a single old woman without children, and this guy then started creating a lot of problems for her, would not allow her to occupy it, and was very, it was very violent basically. So even though she had a piece of paper transferring the land title to her, she could not actually occupy the land. So ultimately, the illegal measure has to be seen as providing the access. But it was then, after many years, up to the woman herself and her neighbors to use the intangible resources they have, like, for example, contacts, solidarity, social relations, yeah, to actually negotiate with this man to get this, give her some access. So she arrived at a compromise with him. Okay, you take this part and I'll take this part of the land. Okay. So you see, what I'm trying to say is, by saying access control, we often use it also as a dichotomy, as a binary, like we use men, women, yeah? The fact is that access to control over something is also is negotiated within social relations, and often the relations of gender. Okay, all right, let's go on.
Comment from Agnes, sorry. Agnes says, just to add that when it comes to benefits in Uganda, there are many cases where women produce agricultural products like beans, groundnuts, but still do not benefit by way of gaining from the sales made because their husbands decide what and how much to sell since the produce is on their land, i.e. the men's land.
Yes, this is an experience actually quite common. I think also what they can gain is again negotiated within the social relationship of the households, because somebody owns the land and another person owns the crop, and there is then constant negotiation going on. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think also just Agnes, you've in some why do we use these concepts in development is because often the emphasis on access to education, access to credit, access to some sort of resource that development gives, and the assumption is that if you access those education, you'll get a job or you'll get income, and we know that we need to be thinking about not only about the resources, but the benefits that are supposed to be derived, and do they actually derived? So in that more broader sense, that's why this particular concept is helpful, because it does force us to go beyond just accessing something.
But also with the proviso that um, when you just look at control separately from access, or we look at access separately from control, and you dichotomize it, then it's not reflecting reality, because in reality, control is always negotiated within social relations.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Next slide, Moitri.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So the next slide, as you can see, now let's try to bring all of this together with the definition of development. So what I'm trying to show you is the whole idea of production and social reproduction, and how does it actually tie up with the development paradigm. As we mentioned, that production is for the marketplace. Look up to your left, which means look, the arrow going to the top shows that it enters the market, it enters the policy arena. Yeah, so that means that policies will be made to encourage this particular form of production, so that more goods and services can be sold, etc. So therefore, once it enters the policy arena, it gets the resources. So if that particular area of production has to be encouraged, then it needs certain resources. So entering the policy arena means it gets resources. But if we look at social reproduction activities, they are mainly market unresponsive. Like Diane Elson is has said and given a very good example, that if, for example, a woman's field, an African woman farmer's field needs to be harvested in the next 10 days, and her child is sick, she doesn't have any other option. She must take the child to hospital. She must get some medicines for the child. So even if it means letting the crop rot in the field, she has to be able to do that. She will do that. So what she says is, it shows that the kind of labor going into social reproduction, that is, she has to take care of this child, is not market responsive. It is market unresponsive. So even though she would earn better if she sold that crop, harvested, sold that crop, the fact is that she can't. So because it's market unresponsive, it doesn't enter the policy arena. And because it doesn't enter the policy arena, it doesn't get resources. So now, if you think about it, if the end goal of development is to measure how much gross national product is being made, it is only measuring that part which is on the top, the black part, which means that it's entering the policy arena and getting resources. But if it's social reproduction, it is not. And as we know that this performs both a class text as well as a gender text. If you think about it in intersectional terms, you can see that most of the work that poor people do and exchange is not considered as production because it doesn't enter the marketplace. Similarly, among poor women, actually, since they are doing most of the social reproduction tasks, their tasks remain unresponsive, market unresponsive. Their caring has to go on, otherwise lives will be at stake. And so, but they can't respond to the market, so it doesn't enter the policy arena. Okay, I'm going to stop this here.
Okay,
And as
but
you
we also
know,
have a comment from Agnes. I
yeah,
agree completely. We need to focus on benefits, which for a long time have not been the case. There are there are few women with negotiation skills. It's also an area we need to prioritize when it comes to development.
yeah. I just want to warn people against seeking individual skills improvement. Because I'm not going into the institutional elements of this, but I think that both, yeah, you should look at it because this gender subtext informs all kinds of institutions, not just the family community. Okay, so it's a structural thing. Agnes, I just want to point out, uh, women negotiating for more, yes, but actually the whole structure of production and reproduction doesn't change, modify. You still will get people beating against their heads against the wall and not getting out of it. So remember that it's not just the solutions do not lie in individual skills building. The solutions lie in being able to see the structural problems in the way in which development is being set up and to try and to change that. You're like in UN, you for example are in a UN institution, so you should be able to see that. So and have some influence on it. So it's that's why we teach this.
I,
It is very, yeah. So policy arena, yes,
Sorry,
Bob.
go ahead. No, just a very another way to put that, Moitri and Agnes is it's not to say that negotiation skills are not important, but when you think about it, what you're doing is actually you're fixing women. So women's leadership, all these things that we do for women, yes, they're important, but if that's the only thing you do, what you're basically saying is that women are the problem. They're lacking the negotiation skills, they're lacking leadership, and it's not acknowledging, as Moitri says, the wider social structures that that will just reproduce this idea that who is a leader or who's supposed to be in the market or what the market includes or does not include. So that's why I think the reaction to that particular comment is not to say negotiation skills are not important. Okay, Moitri, do you want me to, you said you were going to end here, or did you want to proceed to the next slide?
No, I think I'm going to end here, but just the next slide, just one more slide.
Okay, coming. See if social institutions is the next slide.
Yes, I just want to say, because Agnes was talking about this, remember that these formal and informal rules are what makes the divisions of labor actually stay in place. The rules regarding production and reproduction, and so if you don't think of the social arrangements which make it possible to get things done and how it's going to be done, you can't get out of this mode of yeah, that this is how it's happening is what we should try to analyze. Okay, I think we're going to end there because it'll take too long otherwise.
Okay, so can we then proceed to the second part of the webinar, Moitri?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I just need to switch over, ladies and gentlemen. We're just going to go to the other PowerPoint. Just bear with me. Right, so all right, here we go. So we've spent the first part here is clarifying gender analysis concepts, and then we want to think about now what are the implications for development programming. And as part of your pre-webinar assignment, you were all given a handout, which is a case study from the Indonesia Community Forestry Project. And the reason why we took this, even though you're probably saying it's quite old, yes, it is, but actually things haven't changed so much. So I hope that you'll also recognize that this type of community development work and this type of analysis and how they use the analysis concepts is still quite common. And particularly focusing, for example, on a gender division of labor, and also access control and these sort of tables. And so then what we've asked you to do is, as part of your pre-webinar thinking and preparation, is to think of 2 questions after reading the case study. And so we're going to go one at a time, and I have them up on the slides. The first one was, so what do the activity profiles tell us about the gender division of labor and distribution of resources within this community by Hassan, and what do they not tell us? So I'd like you to think about, or you should have thought about this idea about these concepts and what they can do and what they cannot do and how they're being used. And already there's some hints in the text that provide you what it does not tell us. So I'll open up the floor that if people want to either raise their hand and comment or write in a comment, you can do one or the other. And maybe in the meantime, Moitri, you and I can think about what we can have a conversation amongst ourselves in the lieu of comments from participants. Okay, so I'll just leave that open for people. Agnes. Okay, Agnes is going to, has a question, so we're going to unmute you. Now, the problem, Agnes, oh, here we go. Agnes, you may, unfortunately, it may be because you're using a Macintosh, which we just realized had some problems. You may want to just type in your comment, please. Because we can't seem to, or you unmute yourself, please. We're just waiting for Agnes, everybody. You cannot hear any response. We're just having, ladies and gentlemen, technical issue. Oh, here we go. No, okay, okay. I'm speaking to you, Agnes. It seems like you're offline or something, Agnes. You don't show up on our thing. So maybe we're gonna type to you and ask you to type your comment. Yep, she will type. Okay, good. Just hang on, everybody. Agnes is just typing her comment. Can you say yes, please? There. Just type. Can you type? Respond to her back. And actually, I just noticed, everybody, that when you comment, if there's a send privately or send to all, then everybody else can actually potentially see the question, so then you don't have to listen to me repeating it. We're just waiting for Agnes. Oh, hey, Agnes, we now see you on the microphone. If you want to start, Agnes tries talking to your microphone. Oh, are you there, Agnes? Okay, Agnes is going to go ahead and type. We should proceed. Okay. So the question is, let's take the um, activity profile. So what does it actually tell us about what's happening with the gender division of labor within this community? And what does it not tell us? Can people give us some ideas? Okay, we have, okay, Giselle, do you want to, we're going to unmute you, Giselle. We've unmuted you, Giselle. Hi, Giselle.
Hi, I'm not sure my line is too good, so I'm typing.
Okay, we can hear you okay, actually.
Okay, so I think the activity profiles tell us mainly about the classical gender division of labor. Women working on reproductive tasks, while the men and boys, they mainly work on productive tasks. But, and what they do not tell us is the type of women working on, they do not tell us about the age of women working on what kind of doing what of activities, the kind of men doing what. So they need to tell us this so that if you have to the analysis be more deep.
Yeah, well,
Hello.
they do. Yep, they do tell us at least between male child and female and
I
male
can't
adults.
hear.
They do tell us the difference between male child and adult childs. Or, sorry, and male adults and women child and women adult. So they give you some, but certainly it does not give you any sense of within. Um, those categories, for example, those with whether you have land is a particular issue, or whether you are recently settled. So certainly class issues do not come. So that's exactly, they do not tell us that exactly. But they also tell us actually, I probably would say that what does tell us is that women are doing productive, quote unquote, productive work, particularly maybe not as much according to this profile in agriculture production. So everything, the top sort of 10 categories of planting and weeding to cocoa growing, but women are involved in that. So that's interesting that it does recognize that. But what it doesn't tell us, for example, is we know from the text that women are unpaid and work alongside their husband. So we don't have a sense of how that, what are the relations of production between men and women, and A, and B, how dynamic, or how can that change? Going into the next question later. Um, Let me ask you a question. Did you feel that the profile was okay? This is just sort of a summary, but there's something really missing here. If you look at what the different types of production activities are listed, so you have sort of major agriculture production, commodities, some sort of more subsistence, home gardens, I assume it's subsistence, and then sort of everything from sort of transplanting, harvesting the coffee and tobacco. Um, there's something I thought was missing there, given the, for example, the name of the project. Does anybody else also see that? Okay, so Giselle, just reading your comment now, Giselle, you're saying the activity tells us of the classical gender division of labor, women and girls handling reproductive roles, and men and women performing production work. But also, it actually does show, Giselle, women and their work in the productive sphere. So I'm not too sure if I agree with you. Yes, they do assume them as homogeneous groups. And Agnes is saying that the activity profile is important on how men and women spend their time on different activities, but does not bring out the challenges each groups find in doing what and who benefits from it in terms of rewards. Absolutely, that comes later on to the access control profile, but in terms of bringing out their challenges, I mean, we can clearly see that women are involved when you look at their production activities in many more activities, and you'd probably want to do some sort of time use survey, but you could imagine that, for example, that they are doing their labor burden is much higher. What was interesting about, okay, Agnes says, apart from those activities engaged in markets and other activities like weeding and harvesting, absolutely, it's focusing on mostly those activities that have monetary value. And that comes to my observation about, this is a forestry project, and we assume that people are living from forests and using the forests. What we often find is that the forests, like agriculture, are predominantly understood in terms of trees and timber products. But we do know that communities use forests for non-timber products, and that can be a source of usually subsistence or can be used for petty trade. And I don't see that within this profile, and it makes me wonder, what exactly are they considering as productive activities? So it's that idea of what is production, and the perhaps underestimating or considering some activities are reproduction, so they're not considered. But also, if you look at the land use, 33% is unproductive. So even that, you see the categories themselves start thinking about, you have agriculture production, home gardens, private woodlots, fallow, and unproductive. But I mean, are forests really, or land completely left unproductive? So we really have to sort of challenge, when we use these categories, what do we mean by, what do we consider as production or reproduction? What's even counted as that? Okay. So,
sorry,
yes,
can I just stop for a minute? This is a very important point. It's also the vision of the outsider, who brings to the analysis or to the measurement ideas about what needs to be measured in their worldview. Whereas for forest-dwelling communities, this is often a very different rationale as to how resources are used, land and forest, and for what. Do you see what I mean? So like Franz was saying, it says unproductive. What do they mean by unproductive? And we need to ask who thinks it's unproductive. It's those who are documenting, but it may not be the same for the people there.
Okay, thanks, Moitri. So Kieran, I know you wrote a comment about access control benefits, so we're going to come to that later in the next. Let's just dwell a little bit more just on the activity profile, and then we'll come back for both of them. Giselle says, women and girls are more seen in time-consuming roles. Yes, these roles are in addition to mainly unpaid. Absolutely, paid work is mainly given to men, except Giselle. They do say that women, which is interesting, and let's just keep note of this for later, in terms of nursery reforestation. So it's a very important point that they actually are getting paid for that. And the second point, I guess, to lead to the next discussion is this gives a very static idea of a profile, and it's quite limiting in a way, though it's also helpful. For example, what we do know is that 30% of the households are headed by women, either as de facto or de jure female-headed households, i.e. they're either because of migrant labor or because we assume that they're widow. So we don't get a sense of this from this profile of how, as you say, the just broad categories of at least, well, men and women, or maybe as adults and children, but it doesn't reveal that that sense of the different intersectionalities of this community. So that's one thing that is missing from this. And one thing it also doesn't give us a sense of getting that it's static is changes. So I mean, I guess you could use this and think about how this would change and what that would mean for people's activity profile. But right now, and that's the problem with a lot of these frameworks, is that when we start using this in a table like this, it fixes as if this is the reality. But of course, there's going to be all sorts of sort of changing and exchanging of labor and negotiating within these different activities across across the different types of activities, and that's really based on a genders of social relations. So this idea about bargaining and who's doing what is really not there. Also, my question about the social reproduction, it talks about household work, feeding cattle, collecting firewood, collecting water, collecting natural medicines, animal care. Absolutely. But you have to think about, is that all that's really required to reproduce a family, a household, a community? And you can almost sense a privileging, even in I don't know if it's fair, but a privileging of production activities. You look at the list and it's what, 15, 20 things, and you have, not so many in reproduction. Yeah, of course, I'm not using that to illustrate, but it gives you some sense of perhaps, again, the Moitri's point is development being about production. And yes, this profile helps us think about reproduction, but it's not really, it's seeing it within those eyes of production. And they're not interrelated, so we don't have a sense of how the reproduction activities are supporting or also affected by production activities. So, no more comments from people? Moitri, did you want to add anything beyond that? And I have one more comment after that.
No, just what's your comment?
Well, the comment is that I guess what's interesting about this, and again, it's the visual of having a box. So you have these columns for male child, male adult, women child, women adult. And as if these are existing onto their own. And if you actually look at, for example, reproduction activities, and you have X's all by the woman child and the woman adult. And in my diagram, I'm drawing an arrow from the woman child to the woman adult. This idea, is it such a coincidence, for example, that women children, it's a funny term actually, women girls basically, are doing household work, feeding cattle, collecting firewood, collecting water, etc., and that's what women do. And it's this idea that what Moichi was saying, that gender division of labor is not just to clear who does what, but it's also how this becomes part of your identity and how it becomes also part of a hierarchy. And so we can see from the explanation that, girls are involved in housework from an early age, at the age of 7, they're feeding animals, etc., and they don't go to school. And then it becomes, this is now getting a sort of, now finding more insights into what are the implications that girls are doing these works at the age of 7. And you can see now how this would then become part of being an adult woman. Well, if you don't go to school and you don't have an education or know what possibilities are, or perhaps have some sort of trade, you're going to be doing the reproduction activities and possibly the nursery reforestation. So that's what also we need to be using these tools in a much more basically dynamic way. Okay. Unless there are other questions or comments, nope, there aren't. I will go on now to the access control profile. So again, what does this tell us, or what does it not tell us about this access control within this community? So if you could also, as before, either raise your hand or type in a comment, and then we can use that as a basis for discussion. Okay, we have here Agnes saying, what do we need to do to change the status quo in the activity profile under our analysis? I think what you're asking, Agnes, is, if I understand correctly, is, well, so I was critiquing the use of this tool. Well, one thing is to recognize that these tools it's not to say the way sorry, let me start again. It's not to say that the way they provided this profile is quote unquote wrong, but also to recognize how these frameworks or these tables are really reductive. They shape what we see and what we consider as valuable. So it may be one way to present data, but we have to recognize that this is not in itself the end of your analysis. In some ways, it's just the beginning of your gender analysis. But gender analysis oftentimes, and I've seen, is this is the activity probe. This is what happens in the community. Again, as these roles are unrelated, they don't change. We don't understand why is it that people are doing these things that they're supposed to be doing. What is it about? What are the social rules behind that? So the point is gender analysis and using these conceptual tools is not just completing these tables. Maybe this is a way to present data, beginnings of data, but also to not get tricked and think that this is the community and this is the way it works. So that's what I'm suggesting, if that answers your question.
Can I just add that actually all it does, and you have to take it for it, that it gives visibility to different kinds of labor performed by different genders. That's what it's doing. It's not the last word. Like, like if you put the two together, that is both the activity profile and the access and control, you learn much more. You learn that, for example, women and men inherit and own land. There are a large there's quite a sizable chunk of people who own land, and they hire labor. So there's paid labor that is available from among the poorer people. So you get the kind of contours of a community, a mixed community, a class-wise and otherwise. And that's very interesting to put the picture together. So I would say that by themselves, these tools, what they do is give you a profile, parts of the profile of, make certain tasks and certain facts more visible by mentioning them. But it should not be taken as the last word, that it doesn't change or whatever.
And more so, yeah. Well, actually, what I found not very helpful, Moitri, is that, for example, on the resources, okay, we have women have access control apparently over land and paid work, and men have access control over that of a credit machines, fertilizer. That's interesting, but it's all this. It's using access control together. And it doesn't really tell me very much. So, okay, women have access control over land, as do men. What does that really tell me in terms of, for example, the differences amongst men and women? We know, for example, there are different sized landlords that was in the text, and certainly they would have different control over that. There are different income class categories. And therefore you're going to have different types of access control. So well, it does provide a profile. I think it comes down to what Moichi was saying when she was presenting the comments, the concepts, in that we can't use these as binaries in the way that they are used here, the way they're presented. It's fine for a presentation, but once again, this cannot be your gender analysis. This doesn't really tell us anything, for example, of the social relations of gender. Absolutely not. It doesn't tell us also anything about the different types of resources, which is interesting. So let me ask participants a question. So Moitri defined resources quite specifically. And what sort of resources are presented here in the resources table? Yes, we have land, credit machines, fertilizer, paid work. What sort of resources are those? And why? And then the second follow-up question to that is, so what is that very helpful, or is it quite limiting in the way resources are defined in this table? Anybody? If you're if you're interested in discussing this, maybe you could put your hand up and we could just have a conversation while the others are listening. So someone want to volunteer? Otherwise, I'm going to have to talk to Moitri, and we've talked all morning. I could pick on somebody. This is going to be fun. How about Noor?
Kiran.
Oh, I was going to say
Oh,
Noor.
Noor. Okay. Okay, Noor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. These are absolutely more tangible results. So let's get you on the phone, Noor. I feel like it's a talk show. Noor, do you want to? We're going to unmute you. Let's have a little chat here. Okay. Okay. Are you there, Noor?
Yeah, hi, hello.
Hi. Hey, where are you? Where are you? In Castricum?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not a bit feeling very well, so probably my voice is a bit funny.
Okay. I'm sorry, and I didn't mean to pick on you. Are you well enough to have a 30-second
Yeah, it's
conversation?
okay. That's
Okay.
fine.
Right. So absolutely, you said these are more tangible resources, and we said that Moichi was saying there are also human resources and intangible resources. And why would that be limiting if, for example, this just focuses on tangible resources?
Because I think based on the presentation that we have heard in the module 1, as well as we also heard it today as well, that these resources that usually can be accessed by women and men are very different. And I think we're only looking at the tangible only, that doesn't tell us a lot about what is other type of resources that men and women can have access to. So that I think it should be more varied in terms of what kind of resources, and this is definitely only to the something that is more tangible, is more related to again economic measurement.
Absolutely, absolutely. That it's really focused on the production and again productive work, but we're missing really key insights into resources that could help us understand how change happens within this, for example, this community. I mean, you could look at, for example, intangible resources that I was making the argument with you in Module 1 is really a very important resource to consider when we're particularly talking about power and particularly in social relations of gender, because it's about issues about clout and who you can influence and your network. And you know, you can be very powerful and they maybe not have credit or machines or fertilizer, but still further yourself and your interests if you have those intangible resources.
Yeah, I agree completely with you, Franz, and that's why I think this table is really limiting us in analyzing the relationship between access and control, which cannot be just seen as a very binary approach, as well as toward what you have mentioned already, that who has the access, for example, here for land is women and men both have access to land, but what does it mean in practice? That really doesn't tell us the in terms of presentation in the table, that is very, very clear, yes, but what does it mean and how can we relate in terms of their relationship in, I don't know, negotiation, for example, in using the land, or as what Agnes has mentioned, and how that women has certain access to some production, but then cannot sell it because they have to negotiate with their partners, etc. So that doesn't tell me anything from this table.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you could imagine, for example, of an interesting exploration if you look at extension programs. Extension programs are about meeting with your agriculture extensionists. It's about meeting with probably your fellow farmers in demonstration plots. So that's a benefit from the training that's I suppose I would call that a resource. It doesn't matter, but the point is that there are other benefits that accrued from that. Knowing your neighbors and knowing what's going on, influence,
Contacts, yeah.
Contacts, right? So if you don't have that, extension programs just becomes a technical matter of giving agriculture information, but not what people gain from that. And you can think about issues of confidence and your sense of yourself and agency. So again, it's when we have things, again, the idea of access control personally, I think, is a very helpful concept. But when you start breaking it down like this in boxes, either you have a really comprehensive table, which is also very difficult to do, or you use the tools as a form of analysis and try to create interrelationships. Because this way they're all kind of in their own little box, and it doesn't really help you.
Yeah, I have a question about this presentation of this gender analysis based on your experience working with the different type of tools. Of course, this one is using the Harvard tools, but again, of course, every tool has this kind of limitation. But how do you deal with this usually, Fran, so that or Maudrey, so that you can also show something that is very clear in terms of presentation, but then you can also say much more deep about the relationship. For example, between the access and control, and in this case, between the actors, the women and the men, etc. So how do you usually present a much more comprehensive gender analysis using a certain tool that you know it has also some limitation in this case?
What
I think I think the idea is, I would say, it's not the tool which is limited, it's the way in which the tool can be used that gets limited.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and because the tool is a conceptual tool, you can, you know, it has to expand into an explanation of the gender relations in the area. It just gives you hints how to think about, work out the relations of gender in a particular area, in a particular context, or whatever it is. So it's not so much the tools, although I have to say that a mechanistic use of the gender division of labor, for example, limits one because the gender divisions of labor change because of external changes. In this, for example, in this particular case in Indonesia, you can see that not only did the division of labor changed, but the men and women owned or had access to also changed. And that was not because of the community or an antagonism in men and women. There were traditional divisions of labor onto which, and access, traditional access and control over resources, to which then you have an intervention. So it's the, it's the forestry planning intervention that also changed these relations. So you can see that it's very important to use the tools as concepts and to follow up where and how the changes occurred. Change is not always for the better. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And change is not always for the better.
I just made one quick comment, and we're going to Enoch. So I think this is kind of working. I hope. Thank you, Noor, for jumping in like that.
You're welcome.
And of course, the problem with this, similar as the activity profile, and this is even worse in a sense, is that we have these homogeneous categories of women and men, and it masks, for example, what we do know is that there are, when it comes to land, there are different size of land holdings that are being owned by different percentages within the community. So it doesn't give any sense of a class, and it doesn't tell us about the different sort of income brackets and basically who has access control over these particular resources. What sort of households, considering we know that 30% are de facto female-headed households. So I'm going to ask Enoch to join us in the conversation. I'm just going to unmute Enoch, and then you can ask your question, Enoch, and let's go into a discussion. Basically, and Enoch was saying, I'll just start us off, is that if these women were organized in a cooperative society, they could negotiate the control issues of various resources better. So can you explain that a little bit more, Enoch? And knowing that we're not looking for policy prescriptions, but let's use your suggestion and based on your analysis of what's going on. So why do you say that?
Hello.
Hi,
can you hear
Enoch.
me?
Yes, we can
Hello.
hear you. Hi, welcome.
Yeah, I was thinking that the case study, I think, when gives a scenario where women and the men are homogeneous and they are dealt with as individuals. But in a case where they are organized in a cooperative movement, say, negotiating, for instance, for extension services, for credit, for markets, would be much easier. And I think this has a lot to do with policy in the agriculture sector, and particularly for such countries like ours, where the women are really very vulnerable and facing these big giants, and the competition is so stiff, cutthroat. So you may need to organize them better if, for instance, they are to access external markets, if they are to improve qualities that could meet the standards of the international markets. I'm just, for instance, talking about coffee. In such a scenario, you may need to organize them better in terms of like a viable cooperative societies in order to quicken the process and to ensure that the benefits trickle down to each and everybody in their different respects, as women or as men. Yeah.
Okay. So taking what you said, Enoch, so thank you for that. I see a lot of assumptions in the statements you've made. Can you reflect a little bit about starting from women's cooperative, collective organizing for coffee, for example? What are some of the assumptions within your statements and about the change that you think would happen? So can you reflect upon that? Because remember, this course is about trying to stand outside of our realities and how we think about things, and try to be more critical about our own sort of paradigms and points and our perspective. So for me, there are a lot of assumptions in what you said about your suggestion. And what are those?
One of the assumptions is that, for instance, women's access and control, for instance, of the resources or benefits of the land, like Agnes said, may be a little bit problematic because of the patriarchal nature of the land ownership system and the related control of the benefits. So in such a scenario, as a policymaker, we may wish, for instance, to mobilize resources as either government or development partner to either lease land or get a piece of land, and then you organize these women as a group to produce. And in that, the assumption were that women's access and control of land is problematic, and in such a way as individuals, they may not access effective extension services, and scattered as they are, getting markets might be a little bit problematic, and those are the underlying assumptions. So,
but I think there's a basic assumption, which is you've gone straight to the idea of increasing productivity, and from there rolled into coffee and think right. But what's interesting, if you actually look at the project background, the whole idea was to make forestry benefit local communities. So you could benefit local communities of forest by having more secure land tenure, or not having your forests being constantly under threat by production. So I guess my point is that this is the problem with these frameworks, is that we set them up in a way, and that's what we see. The expression that if you have a hammer in your head, all you see is a nail. So what we've seen here is this idea about is just production, and then making these assumptions about what women need. So I think that's part of the problem with these, is that in some ways, if you just pose these frames in your analysis as production, and that's what you're going to do, and then you're going to come up with ideas about where we should organize them, and that really doesn't do anything to address some of the more underlying issues which we've talked about, which aren't really revealed here in terms of people's negotiating powers and their social position, and also what is some of the social institutions in place that are keeping this inequity in place. My guess would be that if you tried to organize women, maybe there'd be a short-term gain, but I'm not really sure about, depending how you do it, that would actually change things in the long run. So I don't know,
Yeah,
Moitri. Yeah.
yeah. I just wanted to say that over here, the main question is the forestry, land forestry, a la the forest department, yeah, and forestry as communities who live in and use forests see it. And the two shall never meet, as you probably all know from your experience. In every country where we have uh, both communities living in forests and national forest departments or ministries, we have this conflict. Yeah, it's a conflict of
Yeah.
class, it's a conflict of interests, etc.
Interests.
Yes, big.
Okay.
Yeah,
So I
so
want
in a
to.
sense,
Sorry, Moitri.
by doing, yes, in a sense, whereas it gives you a very good profile of what men and women do, including children do, and also some glimpse into the access and control profile, it doesn't really tell you a story of the power differences between these within these communities and between this community and the forest department.
Okay.
Okay,
Just
so that's a yeah. Sorry. So when you talk about policymakers, these are policymakers. They are implementing policy, but there's a huge power difference between what these people want or may want, and are our tools able to capture that? That's the question we should be asking.
I
Okay.
just want to remind us a little bit about, and then I'll come to your comment, Agnes, is what we're trying to do in this course is to develop our collective capacities as trainers to get across particular conceptual ideas in ways that are actually helpful for people who we're training. So part of that business is not to be coming up with program ideas or quote unquote solutions. It's not to say solutions are not important, but until we really ground and have a base of our analysis, then our solutions are going to be quote unquote less robust. And I think we sort of faced this a little bit when we had our module 1, in that because of the work, the nature that we do, and we work for organizations that are, supposed to be doing development programs, i.e. solutions, we kind of go to that pretty quickly and default to that position. So Agnes, I absolutely understand the power and potential behind organizing women, because Agnes writes that it brings out the point of collective power due to numbers in case otherwise one individual is not strong enough to negotiate for services, and collective voice in expressing issues of common interests. Absolutely, I'm not at all denying or excluding the idea of collective organizing and mobilizing, but I guess it's about we're about trying to understand these analysis concepts and figure out how we would train others to use them. If we always emphasize or just jump to giving solutions, then I'd say, well, why bother doing the analysis if we know the solutions? So we really have to try to resist our professional training and kind of put it to the side for now, that we have to always come up with solutions. Because frankly, there's nothing in the data tells us here that why collective organizing would actually work. There's really nothing here about that. So it's also for us to be just a bit careful about that. Okay. I'd like to go on to the second question, because we're also now about 20 minutes left in the webinar. So now we're going to do a little bit of crystal ball gazing. So in other words, the next question isn't about, it's about kind of guessing hypothetically what would happen if, for example, what would happen? What are the implications for community members if, for example, the Ministry of Forestry decided that rattan and coffee are good crops to invest in for increased production? So it's like the vanilla bean, right? Remember that vanilla bean idea? So suddenly they've said, well, you know, we've got this activity profile, and men and women are both involved in coffee production, and they have both have access control of land and paid work. So maybe they could be working on these coffee plantations. So we're going to invest. Knowing what we know about as the social relations of gender, what do you think possibly could be the impact if, for example, the Ministry of Forestry did a vanilla bean type thing and said, okay, we're going to invest in rattan and coffee, and we're going to, because there's an export potential for that, and we're going to invest in that. What do you, from these profiles, what do you think could possibly happen? So once again, this is hypothetically using your analytical skills. Does anybody want to proffer? Oh, I was just reminded. I'm sorry. I made a reference to an exercise that we didn't do with this group. So vanilla bean, but basically it's about what happens when what happens when governments do make these policy prescriptions, for example, of investing in something like rattan and coffee. What would be okay, Agnes, food insecurity. So Agnes, do you mind joining us on the microphone? We're just going to unmute you and we can have a conversation about that. Is that okay? We're just unmuting you now. Are you there, Agnes? Agnes? No, I don't hear you. Okay, so Agnes saying that the result could be food insecurity. Why do you say that? Maybe in the meantime, while we wait for Agnes, someone else could offer an idea. Okay, what I may do is actually ask someone to join us. Yeah, who's on the line here? Nan, are you there, Nan? Do you want to join us in a conversation? I've unmuted you.
Who are you asking?
Nan?
Sorry.
I'm asking Nan.
Yes, I am.
Hi, Nan. How are you?
Hi, Franz and everyone. I'm good.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, let's just have a little conversation. So we have a bit of a profile, and we see who is access control. And now the government has said, okay, coffee and rattan is what we want to invest in, and so they're going to do, they're going to give loans, and they're going to give extension services, and what can we see happening with these profiles?
On the face of it, it looks like a very top-down approach. I wonder what was the basis in which the ministry decided that rattan and coffee are good crops. Was the community ever consulted? I would start off with that first, and therefore the implications that such a top-down approach has in terms of the outcomes.
Yeah. Okay. So let's look at the access control profile, and we know that from this that women and men both access extension programs, but women control those programs. Assume that what that probably means is they can say who can go to the trainings or not the trainings. Credits, mostly men access that. Also in terms of being a resource and the actual program itself. So given the way what this profile tells us, who do you think would benefit from something like that?
Looks like the men would obviously benefit.
Sure. And why is that?
Um,
Like, does it have something to do with who is actually, given this current profile, who's actually controlling the credit and the credit programs and extension
yes,
programs? Yeah, yeah.
yes, yeah, yeah.
So basically, such a program would reproduce the privileges and power dynamics that were happening, if in fact,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
that's right. Okay. So, but on the other hand, we do know that women are involved, for example, in the nursery reforestation. And let's
yes.
take that through. So, for example, they have a nursery, and that becomes now a profitable business because more and more people need. I'm completely making this up. I know nothing about rattan and coffee, but let's say they need seedlings, and that becomes now, you know, a bank comes in and gives people credit to buy these seedlings. Does that necessarily mean that women will remain in the nursery reforestation work and paid work? What happens to particular roles when the context changes?
Uh, I think
Does it
they
stay
would.
the same? Yeah, go
No,
ahead.
no. I think the power dynamics also changes. Uh, you know, when especially when a nursery reforestation is taken to the to the productive sphere.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. So you can imagine, so if you have, we said also here in community work, I mean, village meetings, that was one
yes,
thing that both men and women are involved in village meetings. We don't know what
yeah,
capacity,
yes,
but exactly, you know, who then starts. And the basic point is that these frameworks are static in that they don't give us a sense of how these roles and access control is actually quite fluid,
yeah,
right? And again, when we think about it as static, it doesn't allow us to think of, well, what happens if you were to, for example, have a rattan and coffee, you know, export production program, and what that would, how that could possibly shift, and which way could it go? So this idea is, as what you said, yes, you know, these interventions do have an impact, but they're not always for the better. And
yeah.
and but by seeing access control, these social relations of gender as in a fixed manner, and you know, as it's true for eternity, you're not really going to understand what the impact is on development interventions
Mm-hmm.
because of the development interventions.
because of the
Yeah,
development interventions. Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yeah.
Can I just point out that as we were talking about forest communities, communities that live near forests and the way they use non-wood resources. So, for example, it's also mentioned here that women's earnings traditionally came from making rattan products and other non-wood forest goods and trading in the market. Okay, so this is a very important piece of information when you think of if they want to actually now grow, encourage the growth of rattan. Yeah, and that is because if done on a bigger scale, on a commercial scale, it will change the dynamics of who can control that those products. Yeah, so all of this has to be woven in. You have to look at the whole profile, both the activity as well as the access and control profile. What were women doing? They were, because it didn't, you know, like they were forest communities, so they do use rattan and they use the non-woods. Once it becomes a commercial crop, is it really going to stay that way?
Yes.
great. Okay, that's very helpful. And that's, I guess that's also one interesting point, you underscore that, Moitri, is how these tools are often used, again, as sort of discrete concepts, they're not interrelated or understanding how this can build up a profile. So I just want to get to some other people's comments, and I think maybe we can start wrapping up a bit. So Giselle wrote, currently men and women produce coffee, while women are principally in production, marketing, and sales of rattan. If the Ministry of Forestry decides to invest in those crops for increased production, men will be more involved in their production and sales, while women will probably be involved in activities with less economic value in these value chains. Yes, so that's what we're leaning towards. Thank you, Giselle. In addition, women have access to land, but their plots are small compared to that of men. I don't know if we know that from the data, but let's
we don't know
assume
that
that.
from the data.
We don't know that. Women have less access
Let's not
to training.
assume anything.
Yeah. Women have less access to training, education, absolutely. So gender inequality would be reinforced, quite possibly. Agnes writes, I say food insecurity because if all efforts are directed towards coffee because of the returns, it's likely that less time will be invested in food production, which benefits all. It may, on the other hand, allow women to gain economic power, assuming that they will benefit from that, if coffee is directly under women's control, yes. And they will buy food and other services, just thinking, yes. But we also shouldn't essentialize, Agnes, that absolutely that maybe women would buy food and provide for the household, but we can't also homogenize that all women are necessarily benevolent in that manner, automatically. Enoch writes, men would certainly benefit more because the value chains of these crops are male-dominated, particularly in the higher activities like marketing. Yes, so there's basically this idea that if you have these social relations of gender and these social relations of production, that if we don't understand these and just look at these, the roles and who has access control as sort of cells within a box, we're not going to understand how these possibly can shift. And that's what a lot of you have now said in thinking that through. Okay. I'm just looking at the time, and Moitri, we have about 5 more minutes, so do you have any comments that you'd like to make, closing comments, and then maybe we could see if there's any last comments from people.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think from many of the, thank you for your questions and comments, but overall you have to realize that gender analysis doesn't stand by itself, okay? Gender is always within, and this case study in that way, although it doesn't tell you very much, it tells you enough to get an idea of the intersectionality between class, gender, and for example, government resources and policy making. It tells you very well what is being privileged. For example, production is now being privileged. The livelihood opportunities that people had living next to the forest will soon be a thing of the past. Apparently, women have done worse because of the first phase of the project than men, but then we ask ourselves which men and which women. So please, my plea to you is not to say men, women. A, that's not gender. B, gender never stands outside of other social relationships. So here, for example, very much at stake is social relations of class. Production relations are very much here emphasized, and you can see now also the makings and the beginnings. This is 1983, I think, of the environmental crisis, the deforestation, the use of decades of use of forestry as a commercial venture, etc. You can see all these, using a little bit of general knowledge, you can see that. But don't generalize, because it happens in your community in this way, and the policy of this sort is the answer. It may not be the same elsewhere.
Good.
So that's my closing remark.
Okay. I had a closing remark, and I can't remember what it is now. Oh, I know. Yeah, it was this idea about gender analysis. We use the term gender analysis, but just to reinforce a little bit, it should probably be called engendering your analysis. There's nothing that stands apart. more often than not, maybe you do that, but then it remains a part, and it doesn't actually affect your mainstream thinking. So the gender analysis, it's not a standalone activity. It can be, but it should inform your overall understanding of what the particular situation to lead to a engendered analysis. So that's what the point I guess I wanted to make. Okay, so just one more maybe round of if people have questions, or maybe let's just say not comments, because I think let's just questions of clarification. So maybe there's an idea that we've covered that you would like us to cover again. So that's okay, and if you weren't clear on the first time you asked a question, you can ask it again. So any questions, either raise your hand or type it in the text box. Okay, either people are gone to have coffee, or they, and by the way, we can actually track about who's active and not somehow. There's some sort of motion detector here. Oh, Agnes. Okay. Agnes, if you have, no, Agnes did not have a question. If you did, Agnes, you can write it, because I know we had trouble with the call. I'll just wait a few more minutes, and who's
So who do we have with us? We have Noor, we have Kiran, Enoch,
we
Agnes, Giselle,
we had Agnes and Aza and Enoch and Francesca. Hi, Aza. And Julie had to leave. Kiran, Nandini, Noor, Yuko, and Erland.
Erland, okay.
Okay.
Okay,
we
good.
have, yeah. Let's see. Agnes says, here, are we, okay, this one, okay. Agnes saying it's very true, gender differs by context. Absolutely. So that's the whole idea, that we cannot homogenize. And I think that the trick of that is that whenever you say men do this and women do that, just stop yourself. Well, who do I mean? Which men? Okay, it kind of becomes a self-censor, and we can all do that because we all tend to kind of do paint with wide brushes. So that's kind of a bit of a trick that you can use. And then Agnes was saying, thank you very much for the intellectual exchange. You're welcome, Agnes. Nandini, empowerment, more clarity. Okay. Oh, so you'd like more clarity on empowerment. Okay, maybe let me just come to that. Giselle, no more further comments. Nandini, that's a good question. It's probably a question that we don't have time for here, but I think it also, and not to put that off, what we can do is refer to a resource, but it also was one of the subjects that people wanted to get into as part of the series of webinars next year. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to refer you to that and the others to this resource, and then we will schedule a webinar, because it really does require a full discussion and interaction like we had now, so we can really sort of clarify ideas. So I hope that's okay. And Aza, yes, I'm glad you found it was useful. Aza writes, thank you, dears. Yes, dear. For this webinar session, it was really helpful. That's great. Okay, well, it's been 2 hours. It's great hearing from you all. And Francesca just writes, it's important work with civil society and government to combat gender equality. Okay, I'm not too sure which part is important, Francesca, so I would say yes. I'm not too sure what you're referring to when you say it's important. Okay.
Francesca's also there.
Yes, and Francesca's there. So we are, just as a wrap-up, we're having tutorials with different groups. And this year and early next year, people seem to be progressing on their assignments, some questions. So we encourage you to A, get in contact if you have questions as a group or individuals about your assignment. B, to provide us with at least your thinking of where you're at or work that you've produced so far. What we learned from the first tutorial, that was really hard to engage and give constructive comments when we didn't have something in front of us of what they're working on. So we ask you to do that, and this actually worked out quite well. So we may actually also continue using this instead of Skype. And then we are continuing to send you bi-weekly updates. So most of you are on the platform. For those of you who have not, just do try to engage with it, because that remains our main way of communing with you. Okay, so Nandini, a wonderful webinar. Thank you. Yes, you're welcome. And Agnes, thank you for wonderful reading materials. Very useful indeed. Great. And don't forget, you all have reading materials for your thematic groups. We've now, all of the folders have at least 2 or 3, so make sure you get to those and give that tip to the rest of your colleagues. Okay. Moitri, any last words?
No, thank you very much for attending this. Finally, we had a lot of people, and good luck with the homework.
Yeah.
And we really look forward to engaging with you in the group sessions.
Yep. And
Okay.
season's greetings to you all. And
season's greetings to everybody, and keep well.
Yes,
and Nandini,
well.
I'll see you in India.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. I'm just going to mute.